Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for participating in the Tokyo Nutrition for Girls Summit 2021 official side event sponsored by Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. My name is Kazuki Sakurai from the Department of Literature, Kyoto Prefectural University. I am acting as a moderator today. Japan has developed and passed on local cuisine, which is prepared and processed from locally produced ingredients, with rice as a staple food, while working to improve agricultural productivity to suit the climate and manage the resources of the mountains, fields, rivers, and seas, based on traditional wisdom. In the post-war period in particular, with the support of the international community, we overcame nutritional deficiencies, and in response to the problems of overnutrition such as obesity and increase in lifestyle-related diseases that have become apparent since then, we are working to build a diet with excellent nutritional balance by utilizing foods developed by companies through the campaign to improve eating habits. In this manner, Japan has built its current healthy and longevity society by taking into account the characteristics of its situation and making unique efforts. Today, the health and sustainability values of traditional Japanese food are being revisited. Japan's experience can contribute to developing countries and emerging countries that need to develop healthier eating habits while taking into account the food culture and customs of each region. Particularly in the Asian region, which shares common elements such as rice eating and fish eating culture, Japanese food preparation method and food content itself can be utilized. In this session, we will discuss how Japan's experience and knowledge can be used to build healthier and more sustainable eating habits while respecting local food culture in order to improve nutrition in all regions. We will also consider how partnership can be formed to put this into practice. Let me introduce today's participants. The chair of this session is Mr. Yoichiro Sato, initial chairman of the Society of Japanese Food and Culture, a specially appointed professor at the Kyoto Prefectural University. We also have Mr. Yoshihiro Murata, who is the vice chair of WASHOKU Japan and representative director of Kikunoi. We have Professor Takashi Morieda from Taisho University. We also have Associate Professor Yasutake Tomata from Kanagawa University of Human Sciences. And from National Agriculture Food and Food Research Organization, we have Ms. Masuko Kobori. Last but not least, from Kanagawa University of Human Services, we have Ms. Yukika Banno. In this session, first half, we will be listening to Professor Sato, Mr. Murata, Professor Morieda about the value of Japanese food. And latter half, we will be listening to the health value of food. Now, I would like to hand over to the chair.
So basically, what is the Japanese food culture and how it can be further promoted and well understood to be explained? Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Sato. Well, food culture, what is food culture? And especially characteristics of Japanese food culture, what are the key factors? So these are the themes or homework I was given. So I tried to be quite brief, maybe 5 or 6 minutes to explain that. For the human being, the food culture of the human being is quite different from the other animals and creatures. And the key is the distribution of labor or division of the labor. The production, not just production, deliver, and also cooking as well. And also, in a broad sense, whatever created, whatever cooked, people tend to eat together, especially after development of the cities or the civilizations. That division of labor actually spread. And nowadays we have that is really scattered and also spread all over the world, as you know. And in urban area, especially in the urban area in the developed countries, eating is actually enjoyed. That's really essence and part of the culture. So in overall, these are the kind of thing we called, so to speak, food culture. That's a kind of static part. But at the same time, with the vast expanding um, division of labor, somehow we nowadays hard to see, visualize what they are. Lack of visibility somehow make us difficulty to see what they are come. And also nowadays we have the term like anthropocene, new term that really reflect the kind of complexity and controversial and also the difficulties that really posing the idea that the additional sort of nutrition added by the additives, so some complicated, rather invisible sort of processes really included in the food production. And also in urban cities, as I said, there are many people are suffering from the excess nutrition intake. At the same time, more than 20% of the global population still suffering from the famine and hunger. In that broad context, what is Japanese food and what is Japanese food culture? That's a big question. I forgot to mention at the beginning that one of the key characteristics of the human food culture is that taking the nutrient intake in combination of the carb, fat and protein from the animals and fishes, and also taking the grains and rices at the same time. So with that combination, eating is kind of characteristics. And maybe that is really reflected in the historical Japanese eat culture and food culture as well. So that's a big picture. And having said that, what we should think about Japanese food culture and how we can actually disseminate and communicate the good thing, the beauty of the Japanese food culture is a big question. But today I'd like to use this maybe around 90 minutes to discuss together with the other panelists. So it's very brief, but that's my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Murata, who is the chairman of the Japanese Culinary Academy. Mr. Murata has written Japanese Culinary Academy's Complete Japanese Cuisine, which talks about the scientific benefit and the rationale for the method, a cooking method of Japanese food. He will be talking about what is Japanese food and its characteristics. Japanese food is completely different from, culinary from around the world. We believe that all the food ingredients are blessed by the God. And the food ingredients itself are complete on its own and perfect. And that's the basic idea behind Japanese food. And Japanese food cooking method are based on the concept of subtraction. So the food ingredients themselves are perfect on its own. However, by purifying, by peeling the food ingredients, we should be able to demonstrate what the food ingredients can offer to the best possible manner. So unlike the other countries' cooking method, basically our idea or concept is based on the subtraction. That's how we are trying to make best use of the essence of the raw material. We have a true sense of respect to the nature because we need to pay respect to the blessing of the God. It's more like a psychological or emotional concept, but from technology perspective, we, Homo sapiens, eat about 30 different food ingredients. If we keep eating the same thing, we get bored. We won't be able to intake those food material. in the first 3 months or first 6 months, babies only receive lipid, sugar, and umami from the mother's breastfeeding. Umami is basically based on the carbohydrate. Countries other than Japan is using fat as a base, but in Japan, we do cooking based on umami. Umami is almost 0 calorie, whereas the fat 1 cc equals to 9 kilocalorie. So because we are based on umami, whose calorie is almost 0, our Japanese food is less fat and less calorie. And that's because of the historical reason. Japan was not opening itself to the world for many years. But umami helps reduce the dopamine, which is a hormone. The difference of Japanese culture is a fact that we offer 65 different food ingredients in kaiseki, and that's totaling approximately 1,000 kilocalorie. French cuisine, 25 different food ingredients, total calorie is 2,500 kilocalorie. That's why countries around the world is paying more attention to Japanese cooking method, how they can introduce the technique of Japanese food, even if you reduce the calorie or use of the fat and oil. If you increase the level of umami ingredients, you can equally satisfy the palate of the people. So that's why Japanese food is considered as sustainable and healthy food.
Thank you very much. So next, the photojournalist, as a photojournalist, visiting many areas of the world and featuring the food culture, Mr. Morieda will explain about the importance of the food culture and also adaptation of different culture. Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Morieda. Well, I'd like to focus on the curry rice and sushi. Mr. Murata talked about the spirit and concept. So from my perspective, I like to introduce kind of real thing what Japanese people have been accepting in everyday life. So having said that, curry and rice. So the curry and rice, which is known by everyone as the food came from overseas. Having said that, this is the dish mostly one of the most eaten dish by Japanese people, I think. Roughly speaking, maybe 7 times a month, or either curry and rice or some curry flavored food are eaten by Japanese people. Similar situation happened to ramen, which is including the instant noodle as well. One of the representative food in Japan is sushi, which can be very excellent high-class sushi, as well as the round table like sushi, but that is either maybe once or twice a month. So it means with a comparison, we can see how deeply this Korean rice actually embedded in our culture. Having said that, the Korean rice is originally from the Indian or the Southeast Asian origin food, and which is kind of common sense. However, at the beginning in Japan, the Korean rice was introduced by UK as a Western food. So then gradually spread and people get familiar with the curry and rice. And so about 100 years ago, maybe around the end of 19th century or so, um, so the curry and rice well spread from that point onwards, including the potato, carrot, and meat and onion. Was a very conventional way. As you can see, the Korean rice was actually introduced as a Western food. And when we say Western food in Japanese, ⑤Japan's, it's not genuine or pure French or Italian, but something like Western style garnishes or the food well combined with white rice, as you can see here. So this is a kind of adaptation and also adjustment to the Japanese culture. So this is the recipe book of the curry, the first recipe in Japan. It's published in Japan around end of 19th century. At the same time, there are some similar books published, as Murata-san and Sato-san mentioned earlier. As historically, Japan somehow prohibited eating meat, and that was actually released by the Emperor of Meiji. That was the 5th year after his coronation. So then, from that point onwards, many Western food actually entered in Japan. And this is the recipe. As you can read, well, maybe we don't have that time. So then, that previous page recipe is represented like this. So Nakamuraya, which is a traditional curry shop, they originate their curry from India. The chef of that Nakamuraya represent or the recooked based on this original recipe. It was too delicious, I have to say. And again, this is quite unique information or the recipe. So nearly 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, in Meiji era, Meiji Emperor also ate curry and rice, and his menu is actually shown here. Tokuzo Akiyama, he's the chef for Emperor. He's quite famous in Japan. So Mr. Tokuyama actually served for the Emperor, and he collected and recorded what he prepared for the Emperor's dining as well as the banquet, various occasions. And you can see curry in Japanese on this menu. And I actually did research on this. Who ate this? Hirofumi Ito. He is the first prime minister before he became prime minister 1 year before. So when he was still the head of the emperor's household department. So yeah, anyways, this is the menu for the emperor, which include curry and rice. So then, having said that, why Japanese people adopted to curry and rice is basically the concept of the well nutrition. So the Japanese people in those days, the average height of the male is like 150 centimeters. And more than 100 years ago, some foreign ships actually came to Japan ports. And for those sailors or the person from Western countries, those officers maybe around beyond 170 centimeters, and then other sailors are around 170 centimeters as well. So, I mean, they have been eating meat. and somehow eating something different from Japanese people. So by looking at the physical differences, Japanese people in those days thought, well, they have been taking, so those Western people are taking more nutritious food. So that's the idea. Therefore, they try to introduce Western food like sukiyaki, somehow arranging the, the style more Japanese way, and somehow make those introduced food serving with rice to make more sort of easily accepted by Japanese people. And also the spice, which is also used for the curry, are taken or considered as a Chinese medicine. So, and also the curry and rice, actually, it's very convenient for the school meal or the armies because the people can take the variety of nutrition but just one plate dish. So that's why it's spread quite widely and quickly. Having said that, the nikujaga, the one of the conventional Japanese menu, actually created in those days and quickly spread in local area as well. The other point is the way of cooking. The curry was actually cooked from the powder at the beginning, in those days when which is first introduced from the UK. But that is changed to raw or instant soup and stocks on retreat, or I mean, it adjusted many occasions by changing the form and unable to adjust itself to camping or gathering or family meal or widely adopted. So they're quite adaptable to many different occasions. That's why the curry and rice is so widely accepted in Japanese life. This is one of the sort of unique example, the udon noodle with curry. And this is actually the menu of one of the Chinese restaurant in Jinbocho. The Tom Polo did cooked pig meat with curry sauce and rice. So there are lots of variety and variations in curry. Yeah, this is another good one. And for example, this is Koko Ichiban, one of the chain curry shops of Japan, but the location is Bangkok in Thailand. And actually introduced Japanese style curry is one of the key menu here. And then sushi or the sushi. Sorry, before lunch break, it's rather difficult to see them. Well, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, then sushi. Originally, sushi is a dish developed in Southeast Asia and so-called narezushi in Japan. It means that kind of preserve food, pickling the fish with salt and keep it 1 year, 2 year. We have the similar the dish like so-called funazushi, which is the local food produced near Biwa Lake. Originally, it was using the fermentation by lactating acidity, but currently we more use the vinegars from rice and pickle the food with vinegars. That's the style in recent years. Anyways, what I thought is that the tempura and other Japanese cuisine are more easily accepted by Western people, but not sushi. But in fact, sushi is more favored. The idea is that the sushi is healthy. That's the idea. And before sushi became boom, Mediterranean diet was quite popular concept. It was a kind of regression from too much meat intake and also the preference of the healthy food habit. And in the past, we believe that Western people do not like eat raw fish. But in fact, they eat raw oyster and also vinegar pickled herrings or smoked salmon. So basically, in fact, they don't have much resistance to eat raw seafood. And also, the Tsukiji market leader actually observed and visited many different markets around the world. And also found that there are lots of raw ingredients available and let people learn how to freshly distribute and distribute those raw materials to the kitchen or market. And also some distribution technology and methods are actually shared with other part of the world. And that enables us or them to get fresh ingredients for Japanese cuisine and well appreciated because of its healthy concept. This is a sushi I found in the United States. So rolled sushi, fried ones, like tempura, and also in addition, slice them like the small piece and put the jalapeno and sauce at the top. Well, actually, this was cooked by Mexican chef. And from Japanese perspective, we wonder whether this is really a sushi. But things happen. We eat, well, the spaghetti or pasta with raw and raw fish and tuna and soy sauce. And again, this is Bangkok. Sushi restaurant is everywhere around the world nowadays. So Japanese food is healthy. That is the biggest reason. And then the image of healthy food is the key driver, I believe. But base of this concept or the healthy Japanese is actually mentioned by previous speaker. The conventional Japanese food don't use much oil or fat, but lots of umami. But at the same time, accepting meat eating habit or Western style eating habit, mostly maybe in 1970s. At that time, I believe that the nutrition balance of Japanese people eating habits are better. I mean, their eating habits were more well balanced. So flexible, well balanced dieting habit is the key. This is the key underlying concept when I actually look at the change and transformation of the food culture.
Thank you very much. Now we would like to move on to discussion part number 1. I would like to hand the microphone over to Professor Sato to facilitate the discussion. Yes. Based on the 3 talks, I would like to lead the discussion. So in this round table, I would like to ask young people, young participants to react to what's been discussed so far. I don't know who is youngest, but maybe I should start with Ms. Sakano. Bano, sorry about that, Ms. Bano. My name is Bano from Kanagawa University of Human Sciences. After listening to 3 panelists talk, this is what I thought. I need to cherish the healthy Japanese food. And based on that, we would also need to introduce the beauty of the different countries' cuisine. And that's something which happened in the past, and that's something we need to reproduce in the future.
もうちょっと、思ったこと言っていいですか？
Well, you can be honest with us.
はい。
Well, well, sushi is originally born in Southeast Asian countries or China. I always thought that sushi it was born in Japan. That was a shocking fact. Okay, let's move on to Mr. Sakurai.
村田さんと森枝さんの
Mr. Murata, Mr. Morieda's
ある意味で対照的というところが
their talk
少しその
were
料理のなんというか
suggesting a different aspect of Japanese food. So we do have localized Western food, and at the same time, we have pure Japanese cuisine, such as kaiseki food.
それぞれのバランスが大事なんだというふうに
And Mr. Morieda talked about the importance of balance of the food. And when Japan opened up its country to the world, and when Japan went through Meiji Restoration,
海外外国の食文化の受け入れ方がどう変わったのか
I wonder how Japanese people reacted to the imported, overseas food. Because when Japan was isolated or closed,
入ってくる量も限られていれば
the information
自分たちの中で
or the foreign items introduced in Japan must have been very limited. So Japanese people are not really exposed to anything that is coming outside of Japan. But then,
村田さんが
all of a sudden, Japan opened up its own country to the world and started to receive Western style food. So when Japan opened up to the world, all of a sudden, all the information started to come into Japan in surprising speed. And I think Japanese people back then were kind of like shocked and were not really able to digest what's coming outside of Japan. The borderline between Japanese food and Western food. Do you, Mr. Morieda, do you think that border should be vague? Is that what you mean by hitting a better balance of the food? Well, I feel so embarrassed to speak about what is Japanese food in front of Mr. Murata, but because we open ourselves to the world and because we started receiving foreign food, we realized, we reinvented the definition of Japanese food once again. In the past, I think Japanese people didn't actually feel or see clear definition of Japanese food. But then after Meiji Restoration, Japan started to receive so many foreign items. So what they had before was defined as pure Japanese. And I think it was around the beginning of 18th century or early 19th century. That's when the image of Japanese food was established. Tempura is categorized under Japanese food, but Korean rice, ramen came to Japan after Meiji Restoration. That's why they are not considered as Japanese food. They are positioned as Western food. However, still, Japanese population eat curry and tempura very casually. So it's not a matter of speed of acceptance. It's more about what Japanese people accepted, how Japanese people accepted a foreign item. So Japanese people accepted curry. However, there are some other foreign food which was not well appreciated by Japanese people. Mr. Murata, what's your response? Umami was used as a main ingredient in pure Japanese food. And then we started to use more of the fat and oil in Japanese food. And that happened after Meiji era. Right. Not limited to food, but when you look at Japanese culture as a whole, I think I need to ask Professor Morieda to talk about this, but actually it's really hybrid. Initially when we opened up the country, we made a fuss about it, but then over time, we accepted foreign items and then almost like positioned that as a part of original Japanese culture. So same applies to curry and rice. Asahi newspaper at one point of time did survey asking the readers, do you think curry and rice is a Japanese food? And more than 50% of, I think it was like 60% or so, 60% of the respondent said that curry and rice is indeed Japanese food. So toward the end of Meiji era, if you ask the same question, totally different reaction should have been made. But then, over those years, now Japanese people consider curry and rice as a part of Japanese food. That's, indicating the essence of Japanese culture. So can I ask, audience in different venue to raise voice? Yes. First of all, I would like to listen to students. Anyone from different venue? Do you have any comments? This is not a class. I mean, this is not a university class, so you can be honest. Please. I am from Ochanomizu Women's University. My name is Sanoshima. Thank you very much for interesting presentation and talk. So Japan received foreign culture, customized it, localized it, and that's one of the Japanese nationality. In the modern era, I feel that global community is becoming more homogeneous. So as we accept or receive foreign food, and if we are going to localize those in Japanese food, I wonder what defines the Japanese ness of food. Okay. Thank you for your question. What makes Japanese food, Japanese cuisine? I think it depends on your your judgment. Basically, when we received Western food, for example, we imported fries and we made it into pork cutlets or sliced cabbage was added on top of the pork cutlets so that we can enjoy it together with the rice.
So that kind of twist or the sort of transformations happen in some point in the course of time. And right now, we have experience of enjoying the genuine, authentic French and Italian and so forth. Therefore, unlike before, we not just simply make all the sort of the flavor and taste make closer to Japanese sort of flavor. our perception to the food may be quite different from in those days. So not just weight and height of the body. I mean, when we look at the athlete in Olympic Games, I mean, there are a lot of athletes have different backgrounds, even though they are representing Japanese athletes. So we shouldn't be so, well, we should be flexible about how we actually see the Japanese, so-called Japanese. So, yes, to the Morieda-san's current comment, do you have any further comment or objection or well, when I think about the food culture, the climate and landscapes are actually impacting to the food it grows there, and then that make the differences when they are cooked by the people, and that local characteristics actually make the difference or the differentiate different type of local food in Japan. So, but nowadays, what we can get as ingredients or food products, it doesn't really matter where I was and where I am, and it doesn't matter where those products are coming from. So then, those sort of element of climate and sort of earthy things are rather invisible. Therefore, the preference, our preference to the food, may be changing, and the Japanese people who, if they have the different or the changing preference to the food or the taste for the food, then that would be somehow more homogenized along with the globalization, and then that's a kind of change I have been perceiving. Thank you for the comment. Well, the localism vis-a-vis homogeneity or the standardized, globalized the food culture, that's a contrast. The contrast. Think about multinational big food industry and companies vis-a-vis very localized producers and companies. So the landscape somehow varies and wide. In a core part, as you said, very locally originated flavor and sort of characteristics is one hand, and on the base of that, we will have more sort of standardized, globalized food culture. And this structure, this landscape itself may be changing due to a variety of sort of situation in the world. So we should be flexible enough to, position ourselves. Well, thank you very much for the comment. The issue is actually related to the second discussion. So if our time allows, we'd like to come back to this matter later. And Kobori-san and Tomata-san, hearing this discussion, do you have any comment or could you share your comment? Kobori-san, please. Thank you very much. My name is Kobori from NARO, National Agricultural and Food Research Organization. Our focus is kind of scientific, science-based. Umami is very good for the health and body. And well, if we found that, then we are going to search for the scientific basis and reasonings. And also the preference of the food of the local people and the benefit of the food habit, including the food to the local people. These are the things we are going to reveal based on the scientific analysis. And on the basis of that, we'd like to make a kind of proposal. How do people can keep on taking this kind of food and food habit for their good health and improvement of the health condition? So that's the direction of our research and activities. So far, we have very grand discussion, and in our perspective is a kind of piece of this big puzzle, but by clarifying and establishing a good scientific explanation about that piece part, and we'd like to make a contribution. So in overall, I'm very much interested to hearing all the discussion and presentations. Tomata-san, please. Thank you very much. Thank you for the exciting discussion. And Murata-san's talk, the umami is the key and foundation of the WASHOKU. And with a contrast with curry and rice, the fat intake is actually mentioned. After Second World War, Japanese people's fat intake has been increasing. That is the fact. So using umami to create a tasty food, that's the kind of sense of value of the culture. And when I look at the Japanese current situation, maybe that value has been rather diluted and weakened, I think. So that's the impression I got after hearing the Murata-san's comment. And to Morieda-san's comment, I actually, his talk is really resonated me because the transition of Japanese people's food habits and food culture are quite significant. When we look at westernization of the food habit of Japan, we have some idea to prevent disease by introducing the Western food, which has more well-balanced nutrition. So then the disease, beriberi, which was one of the key disease in Japan at the time, was the thing people wanted to overcome. And after 1970s, well, with a heightened awareness about the nutrition, the food choice are more to do with sort of the health, making healthy life and healthy body. Having said that, Japan, we have 4 seasons, and each season have seasonal event, and to each of them we have associated food and cook. So then that element will also be considered when we think about Japanese food. So I'd like to hear from 2 of them, 2 speakers about this point. Murata-san, please. Yes. So for the umami is a kind of common term globally nowadays. So the umami or the cooking based on umami element, that is our culture, and at the same time, on the other hand, Western chefs actually started to find that with less amount of fat use, with more amount of umami element, they can actually create more healthy dish. So with that awareness, having said that, it is quite difficult for them, to Western cooks, to understand what is umami is about, because their taste range is sweet, salt, bitter, and sour. But that's a kind of taste receptor, and the receptor, scientifically speaking, there is no umami receptor. It was the theory in the past, but in fact, the sweetness receptor is just next to the umami receptor that was actually discovered as a scientific fact in 2020. With that, still, understanding umami is quite challenging. So the famous chef around the world came to Kyoto to learn about how to manipulate and maneuver the umami element. And after that, they are actually able to create umami utilized dishes. The K, who is actually a French chef in France, actually creating the series of dishes based on the umami element. So with the use of umami, I would say that choice of the umami led the society to go to less fatty food and preference to more tasty umami-oriented dishes.
So Japanese people accepted Western food and made it into Japanese somehow. And other countries' food has also other countries have also done the same. For example, other countries, when they received the sushi, they in a way localized the sushi to meet for the local needs. And also the festival related food of Japan have been deeply rooted to the Japanese old eating habit. Upper class ate luxurious cuisine, but when you look at the food eaten by the general public, they actually took the necessary nutrition upon every festival. Whenever Japanese people celebrated certain seasonal festivals, they created a special food and a meal, and through those special festival food, Japanese people, enjoyed or took extra nutrients, which cannot be taken in everyday life. So briefly, berry was mentioned, but Japanese people started eating a lot of white rice. That's only after Edo era. Before that, Japanese people were eating something similar to brown rice, and that was the staple food before 1850s. But there is no clear borderline since when Japanese people started to eat brown rice, since when Japanese people started to eat white rice. Since time is limited, I would like to conclude discussion number 1, and then I would like to move on. Sakurai-san, please.
はい、それでは、
Yes.
後半最初は小堀さんです。次に小堀さん
The
に
next presenter
地域の農産、失礼しました。
is
はい、
Professor Tomata.
次にトマタさんでは、
So Professor Tomata will talk about the health value of Japanese food. Professor is going to talk about the study conducted about the Japanese food, and he's going to elucidate the factors that contributes to the healthy longevity in Japan. Thank you very much. And this is the title of my presentation. Please move on to the next page.
まず先ほど来お話しいただきましたけれども、近年の日本人の健康水準についてですが、
This is about the Japanese health status. Japan is ranked number 1 in terms of the average longevity amongst the G7 countries. We have long, healthy longevity, and we have very low mortality rate due to ischemic heart disease. We have less obese ratio compared to the other countries. And America, obese rate is almost 7 times higher than Japan, especially since 1985 to 2000, both Japan and women, Japan has a very long average longevity. So what about the smoking rate? Smoking rate is not so good. Actually, for women, for men, we are worst number 1. And also, Japanese people's physical activity level is not so high. Japanese spend a lot of time sitting. So probably because of the Japanese food, we can, keep the obese rate quite low. I just talked about berry, but here I would like to focus on the data after the World War II, 1950. The difference in terms of the ischemic heart disease between Japan and US, that difference is probably coming from the lifestyle. And a lot of study was made behind this topic. In 1957, there was one study conducted. The mortality of US was highest, whereas Japan's ratio was lowest. And in the middle, you see the data of Japanese living in US, their mortality rate of ischemic heart disease was actually higher than Japanese living in Japan. So even if we are the same, ethnicity, if you're living in different culture, leading different lifestyle, the mortality may go up. So Japan is one of the best country in terms of the average longevity. That's why Japanese food is gaining a lot of attention. One of the report is shown here from the Harvard University. Professor Walter Willett made this publication in 1994 in Science. The ischemic heart disease mortality is low in Japan and the Mediterranean countries. That's because we eat more fish and beans. That's probably the underlying reason why those countries show lower ischemic heart disease mortality than US. So what about Japanese food eating population and non-Japanese food eating population? What is the difference? I was involved in such research, so I would like to show you some result. About 10 years ago at Tohoku University, I started my study into Japanese food, and I'm always referring to these studies. So US conducted research targeting at Japanese living in America. They try to position beans, rice, soy sauce, fish, and pickles as Japanese food. And based on this research, I came to realize that their interest into Japanese food is very high. But I thought that it's better if we can conduct a similar research purely based on Japanese food. So 1990s, I looked at the food data in 1990 and analyzed several health factors. So I listed up particularly 9 food ingredients. So this is based on the index scoring method. So the total score will be from 0 to 9. So if you are eating more of the food ingredients highlighted in red, you earn 1 score. And then if you're eating the blue item, you will lose score 1. So we conducted cohort research and compared the mortality. So when Tohoku University conducted Osaki cohort research in Miyagi Prefecture, and based on their data, we did analysis and we tried to identify the impact of Japanese food on health and mortality. So the the total population is 15,000 people, and then we did a follow-up for 20 years, and we came to the conclusion where the more you eat Japanese food, the less mortality you get. So this is another research on disability-free survival. So if you eat more Japanese food, you can lead a longer disability-free survival, meaning that you can enjoy health longevity. So this is the data taken from Miyagi Prefecture. So we wanted to roll out this study to cover Japan as a whole. So at the National Cancer Center, and we did joint research, and we covered 11 different prefectures of Japan, and we conducted JPHC study. This is another cohort study, and we covered 92,000 people in Japan, and we also analyzed the cause of death. And this is the result. So vertically, I am showing you the risk of death. To your far left, you see the all-cause mortality. So the more you eat Japanese food, and then all-cause mortality gets lower. And if you look at the cancer death is reduced slightly. However, if you look at the cardiovascular related deaths, the trend is quite similar to the all-cause mortality. And if I divide further, the subgroup of cardiac disease mortality is nicely reduced if you eat more Japanese food. However, Japanese food may increase the risk of hypertension because Japanese food contain a lot of salt. That's one hypothesis. And in this research, we also confirmed that potassium intake was actually high amongst Japanese food eating population. And there are other detailed food data studies. So we used 30 years old data for those analysis. The Japanese government conduct a survey on the nutrition intake by household. In 2010, Japanese people is eating more bread than rice. And in 1960s till now, the consumption of meat has almost doubled. That's been reported. And based on MHLW's survey, if you look at the very bottom, it seems like Japanese population is eating less and less Japanese food. And that's been confirmed and reported since 2000 and 2010. So can we say that the current Japanese eating habit is the best? That is not the case. Dr. Tsuki in Tohoku University conducted another study using a mouse, and he came to the conclusion that Japanese food back in 1975 is the best in terms of keeping the longest longevity and health. And this is a joint research with Dr. Suzuki. We looked at the overweight adult, and we asked them to use 1975 style Japanese food for 25 days. And the result is that cholesterol level was improved as a result compared to the modern Japanese food. And the same conclusion applies to the younger adults. So Japanese food in general may be contributing to the health improvement and the longer longevity. However, we still need to conduct more research. So going forward, we would like to gather more evidence on the impact of Japanese food and its contribution to the healthy longevity. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. So next, I'd like to invite Ms. Kobori present about the review of the functional health function of the agricultural product and data-based traditional food culture assessment. So please present your talk. Ms. Kobori, please. Thank you very much for the introduction. So, having engaged in the project activities of the Ministry of Agriculture, I'd like to share with you some of our project results about health longevity and also the health and nutrition balance and functionality of the food. So in our team, actually look at the food products constituting Japanese food, like agricultural product. And as you can see in that activities, we look at the traditional products like lofa in Okinawa Prefecture, and also nozawana, which is well eaten in Nagano Prefecture, kind of a brassicacea, and also apples. And these are the food actually we targeted to analyze the functionality of its contained nutrition element. And also for the cohort study, National Cancer Center actually analyzed the relationship between the death risk reduction and intake of certain products like fermented products and also some other food products. In 2025, the system implemented in 2015, the food functional labeling, which requires to submit the scientific rationale to put that label onto the products. For that, the human intervened clinical trials and also the articles and literature research are conducted and try to find out the health impact of those intake of this nutrition. And after the system established, the fresh products as well as the processed food are now able to put the label of the functional food. And this system was very this system is well interested in the overseas organizations. And as shown here, we made series of analysis. And left-hand side show the analysis of the use of the natto, the fermented soybeans, how intake of that products have actually impact on the postprandial blood glucose level. And main components of the natto is gamma polyglutamic acid. And intake of the natto with rice, we measured the which actually have the impact of controlling or suppressing the increase of the blood glucose after eating the food, maybe 45 minutes or 1 hour after the meal. And right-hand side shows the calcitonin. Calcitonin actually presenting the somehow slow down the decline of cognitive functions due to aging. And calcitonin is contained in onion. So for those people actually aged 60 to 80, let them try calcitonin highly contained onion and onion which doesn't contain calcitonin almost none. And then between these two groups, for those who got high calcitonin onion, actually had better result in terms of the decline of the cognitive functions. So to this, again, we're going to apply and submit to get the label for the food function. So the scientific rationale for the functional food in Japanese market started to become popular, but it is common sense and well understood by everyone that well-balanced nutritious food is the very good things to keep and maintain your healthy body. And this is the picture taken from the Meal Balance Guide, which shows what kind of combination of the food in what amount to be combined to create healthy diet and meal. And well-balanced nutritious balance is a very important thing, but according to a report, only 5% of the population are actually doing that well-balanced food. So the life habit and also the food intake are simulated, and we try to analyze how to improve the dieting habit. And related to technology is currently under development. And there is so-called moonshot type agriculture, forestry, ocean product research development project. This is, in short, digitization of the food texture, taste, and flavor. So healthy and tasty food which have well function is the target. So in order to create that state, we try to digitize the information of the crunchiness, flavor, and taste in number or in digital information to recreate them. And if this can be successful, we can create the technology to represent or reproduce the healthy, tasty food and meals. So, well-balanced meal is quite important, and that's why we are developing the technology to introduce a healthy menu and diet. So ultimately, we'd like to develop and propose the tailor-made nutrition and meals, and by which we'd like to pursue our researches for healthy longevity and healthy life. Thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. Now we would like to begin discussion part 2. Professor Sato, please. Yes. Thank you very much for the 2 presenters. We now understand the beauty or benefit of Japanese food. Japanese food offers various, great food ingredients and nutrients. However, people are not proactively eating Japanese food. Ms. Banna, Mr. Sakurai, what's your reaction? How is your food habit? What are you eating normally? So my food, well, I like food with less oil and fat. So I am enjoying all the things that are very close to Japanese food. Okay, so are you confident that you're taking well-balanced food? Yes, I think I am confident in what I am eating. What about you, Mr. Sakurai? I am not a good student when it comes to the food habit. I eat in different time of a day, and I just eat whatever I have at home. Sometimes I buy, buns and bread at convenience store, and I thought that my eating habit is very much problematic. So you don't need to confess. But the people in 33 Lab, what's your reaction? What did you think about 2 presentations? Yes. Hold on. My name is Sayaka Sato from Ochanomizu Women's University. I am registered dietitian. So I came to understand that there are so many other, food materials that I didn't know before. But I am interested in the nutrition amongst the elderly population. And Professor Tomata says that the Japanese food enjoyed in 1975 is ideal. So I wasn't there in 1975, so I would like to know what kind of things people were eating back then. What about the balance between potassium and salt? Thank you very much for the question. I wish I could show you some picture, but as I mentioned earlier, recently Japanese people are eating more of the westernized food, and compared to 1975 and the current Japanese food, current Japanese food is containing a lot more saturated fatty acid. And the balance of potassium and salt, well, I do not know whether their intake was particularly low in 1975. I don't have data with me, so I cannot answer to that question. But okay, so I don't know the answer, but perhaps one of the characteristics of the Japanese food is that we take more sodium. So over time, maybe modern Japanese people are eating less salt. From ecological perspective, people back then must have been taking a lot more sodium. Thank you. When we talk about health evidence of Japanese food, earlier I said that one of the characteristics of Japanese food are the fact that we eat fish and rice. Asian countries are also having the similar eating habit as Japan, and I would like to know what is the current situation. From Cambodia, we have Ueda-san. So Ueda-san, can you talk about the Cambodian eating culture, food culture? Mr. Ueda? Yes, hello everyone. I am participating from Cambodia. I belong to Japan Heart Children's Center. My name is Ueda. As I was listening to the presentations, I came to realize that Japanese people paid particular attention to what they eat. Because of that, Japanese food has become healthier. Now, looking at Cambodia, there are long periods where people couldn't eat enough. So people in Cambodia cherish the time of meal. However, having said that, Cambodia doesn't have dietitian system, and we don't have dietitian here. So the well-balanced meal leads to better health. That kind of concept does not really exist deeply in Cambodia. So now we are promoting a well-balanced meal to the Cambodian people. So how can we achieve that? We try to be creative as much as possible, but Cambodia does have local, cuisine. So unless local people accept, even if the meal is well balanced, then such menu is not taken well. So we need to look at the local characteristics as we introduce well balanced food. And Japanese accepted Western food, localized those imported Western food over time. In a way, I guess Japanese have been quite flexible and adaptive to imported food. And that attitude may give us a good lesson, probably. And that's how we could possibly disseminate well-balanced Japanese food to Cambodia. Thank you. Thank you very much for your input. Professor Morieda, I think you've conducted a lot of research in Cambodia in the past. What's your reaction? The Cambodia that I knew was the Civil War era. Guerrilla, refugee, what were they eating? That's my research interest. But as I was listening to Ueda-san, I thought that just like Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, as Sato-san mentioned, Cambodia people eat rice and fish. And they use salt to process the fish. So salt is one of the major spice people use. And I believe originally Cambodian food is well balanced. It's just a matter of economic development. So that, I guess, is a true challenge. Thank you. Not only Cambodia, maybe Thailand is different, but when we look at or visit Southeast Asian countries, they eat a lot of rice, right? Cambodia eats a lot of rice. Probably more than 100 kilo of rice is consumed per capita. Yes. Now, Japanese people take too much salt. In the past, people ate staple food together with the pickles, which uses a lot of salt. And the curry in Southeast Asia, why is it so spicy? That's because if you go to the rural area and if you eat their food, you will realize that you eat very small quantity of something like curry, but it's very small amount of curry, and then you eat a lot of rice.
That's a kind of usual style. So salty or hot with the peppers, or I mean, they tend to put a kind of strong taste and flavor. It's somehow, well, we should look at how Japanese people possibly decrease the salt intake in the course of time would be a good sort of precedence, I think. I see. There's a sort of historical change, right? And Murata-san, so the, on this nutrition discussion, could I have your comment? So, unlike the other Asian regions, where Japanese dishes or food or eating style is based on umami, and rather than based on the fat or the oil, rather Japanese style is based on umami as well as carbohydrate. And that is similar to other Asian countries, right? Regarding the nutrition balance, I think Japanese diet, Japanese food use more vegetables. So inosine acid and glutamic acid balance are when actually made with the intake of the vegetable together. And in that way, the combination of the nutrition intake is a bit more advanced compared with other Asian countries. I see. Thank you. So the big theme we covered in the second discussion is that, first of all, Japanese food and diet is very good in terms of its potential. But as of today, we have actually the problem. So how can we solve this current challenge? So Murata-san, you are involved in activity of Shokuiku, the school meal program, right? Yes, I visit many the school, elementary schools in Japan. With some of the members. What is Japanese cuisine and what is the Western cuisine? Sometimes children do not know the difference. They had no idea sometimes. I see. So when I asked them to write the name of the Japanese food, then I was asked whether hamburger is Japanese food. The thing is, since they were born, those foods are available. So with miso soup, they eat croquette with hamburgers. And that's why, as a Japanese nation, what has been eaten is, I mean, the mishmash of the Western and Japanese style. So then, for them, well, when I said it's better to eat rice, they just simply ask why. They sometimes prefer bread to rice. So in a way, the cultural hands-on is not so successful in that sense. I see. Kobori-san, do you have any comment? Well, in our research, the food ingredient health functionality is the key focus, and the scientific result to be revealed. That's the activities. And then once people recognize that good nutrition balance and information, then some people actually notice that they need to have a good balance in diet or the eating habit. The thing is, I always say that, well, adding this functional food onto what is your everyday sort of food and eating is the thing we actually originally anticipated. So our research and study is the one to make people realize and be aware of the functional matter of that nutrition included in food. So due to the demographics, people tend to have more focus and interest to the nutrition and food. So what is the ideal food habit or meal as a Japanese nation? Well, that is quite an important factor to think about. Well, younger generation, they are more confident about their physical conditions. So it's rather difficult to change their eating habit compared with elderlies. But if we start the education from the younger ages, like shoku in a school program, and then tasty, new, well-balanced, healthy Nihonshoku Japanese food will be maybe re-established. I see. Thank you. To this point, Morieda-san, do you have any comment? Well, 1975 is a kind of keyword in this discussion. And I myself feel also there's a kind of key points in history. So the through the eating, sorry. So the eating habits or style in 1975, for example, would be maybe re-highlighted or the educated or summarized as a good reference of the well-balanced eating. Okay, so is there any last comment from each of you? Sakurai-san, please. Yes, so the Morieda-san talk in the first part, you mentioned about the food associated with the festival, and the festival-related meal actually somehow complement or the supplement the nutritious element which is needed. That idea can be maybe re-highlighted as a new approach. We have been discussing so far everyday eating, the eating habits, try to somehow modify, reflect the eating habit of 1975. That's a kind of current discussion focus, at least one of them. But the event-related or festival-related meal, which is a kind of occasion-making event and occasion-making dishes. So if we can revive that kind of eating habit and the way we appreciate the specific meal in certain occasion, or then which make it possible to eat certain type of the food in a sort of cyclic manner. I see. Thank you for the comment. Bano-san, do you have any comment? Yes, as mentioned in a discussion, Japanese sushi or Japanese style curry and rice, and also the green tea is well appreciated in overseas. But these are the items independently were accepted as is alone. And the sushi, for example, what I can see in overseas is like the one with topping of the mayonnaise and somehow evolving of its own way in different part of the world. So it's not good or bad discussion, but for us, it's important to disseminate and communicate well-balanced Japanese food is quite important. I see. Thank you very much for the discussion. So since I was asked to summarize the discussion, I prepare one-page slide. So the discussion 1.5 hours today one of the key words is balance. So I pick up balance as a key word throughout this discussion. Of course, we discuss which is good, what is good, and what is bad. But oil or the fat and umami, whatever nutritious element or the flavor element we talk about, balance is the matter. So since we don't have much time, so we can't really discuss about SDGs issues. So this is summary text. So if you like, I can distribute it later. Our food or our eating practice is happening on the globe, on the earth. So the 21st century, we actually think about our eating habit and food in the context of the global environment. We do need to expand our perspective, not just by ourselves, I mean human beings, but also have the perspective of the environment. So from the cultural perspective, we discussed about the food and food culture today. And this is the brief summary of this 90 minutes discussion. Once again, thank you very much for all the participants with your contribution and good discussion.